Hi, my name is Stephen, and this is a presentation on the United Arab Emirates, otherwise known as the UAE. The UAE is a federal state located in the Middle East, consisting of 7 emirates, which are Abu Dhabi, the capital, Ajman, Dubai, Ras Al Khaimah, Al Quwaman, Fujairah, and Sharjah. Its land touches the Gulf and is surrounded by Oman, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and desert. Overall, the UAE is comprised of mountainscapes, deserts, and waterfronts. The UAE's climate makes it very warm, despite touching the Gulf. This makes it a popular tourist attraction. Along the coast, the climate is hot and humid, while near the center, the climate is hotter and dry. Annually, there is only 4 to 6 inches of rainfall. Because of this, vegetation is scarce and consists mostly of shrubs and trees planted by the government. The labor force is nearly as large as the UAE's population. The UAE houses 9.5 million people, of which 85% are citizens. The other 15% are tourists, visitors, and expatriate workers. In 2018, the labor force in the UAE was comprised of 7.4 million workers. Expatriate workers consist of about 9/10 of the labor force. The UAE's business climate factors in a prosperous economy with diverse trade and a solid infrastructure. This attracts foreign investment from many international businesses. It also has an abundant natural resource supply and produces nearly 4 million barrels of oil daily. Nearly 85% of the UAE's revenue arrives from exports of petroleum and natural gas. The picture on the right is an example of one of the UAE's mining sites for natural gas. The UAE's political landscape is stable, and they are constantly improving their economic policies. They offer one of the highest qualities of life among nations and have one of the most tolerant, prosperous, and secure societies in the world. There are a couple of interesting facts about the UAE. The UAE government is an absolute monarchy, meaning it is run by a king. Sheikh Mohammed is the vice president of the UAE and is also the billionaire ruler of Dubai. To add on, many members of the UAE council are wealthy individuals and business owners. Lastly, the UAE has the world's longest metro system, spanning nearly 75 kilometers. The UAE's GDP per capita is a signal of its economic prosperity. In 2019, it reached 43,100, its fifth yearly highest in 44 years, which can be seen on the chart below. In comparison, Canada's GDP in 2019 reached 46,200, which was a $4,000 increase since 2016, but a $6,500 decrease since its peak in 2013. As you can see, Canada and the UAE have relatively similar GDPs per capita. Now, why is this important? In 2019, both countries placed in the top 25 GDP per capita nations, meaning that Canada and the UAE have some of the highest living standards in any nation. However, when looking at their comparison, Canada has a slightly better overall living standard than the UAE. So what does this mean? In Canada, incomes are more equitably distributed, meaning there are less billionaires paired with poverty-stricken citizens, and more small to medium-sized business owners paired with fairly paid workers. From the chart on the right, it can be seen that the UAE's GDP is predicted to decrease in the next 5 years. At the moment, its GDP is around near its 10-year peak. What makes the UAE so economically prosperous? Let's take a look at two of its competitive advantages. First, the UAE takes advantage of its ports to marine shipping. The UAE has 25 bilateral cooperation agreements with ports and nations that allow the UAE to transport goods and services with minimal tariffs, making production much cheaper. In addition, Abu Dhabi ports take more than 25,000 shipments annually, and in total, port shipments account for about $17 billion worth of GDP growth in non-oil revenue. Second, the UAE's large supply of natural resources accounts for a majority of its economy, specifically through its oil trade. Compared to other countries in the UAE, oil is common and competitively produced and priced. To add on, the UAE has a comparative advantage over countries such as America. However, Canada can compete because they also hold a very large reserve of oil. The UAE takes advantage of a global trend of global trade. 9/10 of its workforce are expatriate workers who have traveled from another country to work. Following this, the UAE has experienced past controversy over their treatment of expatriate workers due to their vague wage laws. The UAE does not require businesses to pay a minimum wage. They are only required to pay for basic necessities. In previous cases, the vagueness of the requirements has led to the abuse of workers. The reason the UAE hires so many expatriate workers is because of the unpredictable nature of the projects. Projects can range from long-term to short-term, as the UAE is consistently renovating and building new projects. For example, the UAE's metro system took years to construct, whereas a private building may be constructed in under a year. The UAE's infrastructure presents a striking blend of ancient customs and modern technology. as said by Peterson in 2021. The UAE has excellently engineered ports, airports, and roads. It has the world's longest metro system. Its ports ship billions in goods and services annually. Its highways connect each emirate together, and the UAE houses 884 commercial airplanes, which are located among 9 airports. So what are the advantages and disadvantages of its infrastructure? Pros: its highway system is vast and interconnects each of the 7 emirates through 6 main highways. Its public transport system is efficient, as the metro system covers the entirety of the UAE. Lastly, the UAE is constantly making infrastructure advancements, such as new projects and renovations. In addition, these advancements aim to decrease environmental impact, as the UAE's carbon footprint. The metro system saves 2.2 million metric tons of greenhouse gas emissions annually. Cons: maintaining infrastructure along with constant new projects is expensive and it costs billions annually. For example, the UAE has invested a total of $272 billion into their airports. Another con is that the UAE's projects require human labor, which in the past has led to controversies regarding inhumane treatment of labor workers. As more human labor is required for future projects, controversy is likely to spark again. Lastly, constant construction within its major cities is loud and disrupts normal life. In addition, construction of large infrastructure creates dust and particles that are blown throughout the city by strong winds, causing noise and air pollution. Culturally, there are many do's and don'ts within the UAE. Do's: do accept food and drink using your right hand. Muslims make up 85% of the population, and for them, it is customary to hold and eat using your right hand. Do purchase and drink alcohol in established locations. Muslims are forbidden from consuming alcohol. However, consuming alcohol is not frowned upon for non-Muslims if it is within an established bar or hotel. Some don'ts: do not offer alcohol or pork to guests that do not know you. Muslims consider consuming pork a serious taboo on par with consuming alcohol. Do not point with your finger. Pointing is generally considered a rude gesture. Instead, use your whole hand to signal. Business and human rights issues, which are political and social risks. The UAE is no stranger to allegations of inhumane worker treatment. In 2007, the UAE Ministry of Labor released a report on the protection of the rights of workers in the United Arab Emirates. This report aimed to reduce abusive labor practices performed by international businesses in the UAE. In addition, in 2013, international organizations expressed concerns for the UAE's labor law that did not give workers the right to organize and to bargain collectively. Since then, these controversies have subsided. However, there is a high chance another human rights concern will occur. Bribery and corruption issues, which are also political and social risks. The UAE ratified with the United Nations Convention Against Corruption, otherwise known as the UNCAC, in February 2006. Since then, the UAE has not yet passed legislation to implement UNCAC, but has prepared a draft anti-corruption law. Within the UAE's business climate, anti-corruption is promoted. However, no real law enforces these values. This poses a serious risk for international businesses that need to consider the possibility of corruption. To conclude, why should Canada trade with the UAE? First, the UAE has a diverse economy that trades with many nations, opening up endless opportunities for investment. Second, the economy is free and there are multiple free trade zones that operate without surcharges or tariffs. Lastly, the UAE is one of the most politically stable nations with a very secure market. In addition, the culture and citizens are generally hospitable and welcoming to foreigners. These are my works cited, and that is my presentation on business relationships with the United Arab Emirates. Thank you for your attention.